The lights in Studio 7B were blinding, polished to perfection, aimed directly at the glass-topped table where two chairs faced each other like chess pieces. On the left sat Marissa Kane, a sharp, fast-talking political commentator known for her morning segments on The Pulse. With a reputation for takedowns and viral moments, she had built her brand on calling out politicians, pundits, and so-called fringe conservatives. On the right, Kash Patel, former chief of staff at the Pentagon, investigator, author, and thorn in the side of bureaucrats across both parties. It was supposed to be a 7-minute segment on national security narratives. But when the red light blinked on, it became something else entirely. Marissa leaned forward, her tone playful but cutting. "So, Kash, let's just get right to it. You've been making the rounds lately with speeches about truth, accountability, and federal overreach. But critics say you're out of touch with what the average American actually cares about." She tilted her head, already prepared to pivot into the next segment. But Kash didn't blink, didn't shift in his chair. He just looked at her, calm, focused. "Is that what they say?" he asked. "Or is that what they hope people believe, so they don't have to face the facts I've brought forward?" Marissa smirked. "Well, look, I'm just saying you've been accused of prioritizing headlines over solutions. And I'm saying," Kash replied evenly, "that headlines don't terrify people. The truth hidden behind them does." The camera crew exchanged glances. This wasn't going as planned, because Kash Patel wasn't here to defend his image. He was here to defend something bigger. Marissa Kane leaned in, eyebrow raised. "Kash, look, I get that you want to speak truth to power. That's the phrase, right? But when you start talking about coordinated censorship, weaponized bureaucracy, and intelligence failures, a lot of people just tune out." Kash Patel didn't smile, didn't flinch. He just opened a folder in front of him and slid a document toward her, a printed email chain with heavy black redactions and the words FOIA release, unclassified, stamped at the top. Then maybe they should start tuning in. Marissa glanced at the page, skeptical. "Okay, what am I looking at?" "That's a timeline of emails showing federal officials communicating directly with media platforms about suppressing stories. Not conspiracy, not theory. Logged, verified, declassified. You call it paranoia. I call it the paper trail." There was a pause in the control room. Then, for the first time during the broadcast, Marissa glanced off camera. A producer gave her a silent hand cue, wrap it, but she ignored it. "Okay," she said, "but even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, aren't you worried that you're feeding distrust in government at a time when people are already on edge?" Kash tilted his head. "That's the problem, isn't it? You're more worried about people distrusting the government than the government earning that distrust." The tension on set spiked. One of the techs reportedly whispered, "He's not just answering her, he's flipping the segment." Kash leaned forward just slightly. People aren't tired of facts. They're tired of being told which facts they're allowed to see. Marissa opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The control room was quiet. Even the teleprompter operator forgot to scroll. Because in one sentence, Kash Patel had shifted the ground beneath the conversation. "You're more worried about the distrust than the reason it exists." Marissa Kane shifted in her chair. She wasn't used to losing control of an interview, especially not live. "Well, I think we both agree the system isn't perfect," she said carefully. "But don't you think there's a danger in painting the entire federal apparatus as corrupt? You worked in it. Doesn't that make you part of it?" Kash smiled for the first time, not smugly but with quiet weight. "I did work in it. That's why I know exactly where the cracks are." He placed a second folder on the table, thinner but marked with a Department of Defense seal. "You ever see a briefing that makes your stomach turn? Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't." Marissa leaned slightly forward. "What are you implying?" Kash opened the folder. Inside was a faded photograph of forward operating base in Kandahar, Afghanistan. This was 2012. A medic flagged a vulnerability in our base communication systems. It never made the report summary. The language was softened to preserve optics. 2 weeks later, we lost 3 Americans in a breach. He tapped the photo. That was the moment I realized. The truth doesn't get filtered to protect the public. It gets filtered to protect someone's career. Marissa looked down. She wasn't expecting this. Neither was the audience. At that very moment, a clip of Kash's quote, "You're more worried about the distrust than the reason it exists," was trending on X, formerly Twitter, with over 60,000 shares. Kash leaned back and delivered the line that would take over the internet. The flag doesn't need permission to fly, but somehow, telling the truth about how it's handled now requires clearance. The producer in the control room whispered, "She's losing the narrative. He's teaching." Marissa paused, then tried to recover. "I don't question your patriotism, Kash. I just question if you still understand the moment we're in." He looked at her, quiet. "I do. I just refuse to pretend the moment is anything less than it is." The temperature in the studio had shifted. What started as a fast-paced morning segment now felt like a courtroom, one where truth was the witness and the audience was the jury. Marissa Kane looked to the camera, then back at Kash Patel. "We're not here to litigate the past," she said, voice tightening. "We're here to move forward." Kash nodded slowly, and moving forward means admitting how we got here, not burying the evidence and calling it healing. At that very moment, the control room lit up. A producer's headset crackled. "Heads up, we've got a live comment feed spiking." A moderator watching the live chat feed said aloud, "They want her to apologize." Comments flooded in. "Marissa just got wrecked." "Let him finish. This is the realest interview I've seen all year." "He's not out of touch. He's the only one actually awake." Marissa attempted a pivot. "There's no doubt you're passionate, but some say you're leaning on emotion instead of facts." Kash leaned in, eyes steady. "Emotion didn't build this country, but it's what kept us fighting when logic said surrender." He looked down at the photo again, the one of the forward base in Afghanistan. "3 of my friends died because someone softened language to make a report look better. Don't tell me facts and emotion live in separate rooms. They share the same coffin." Even Marissa looked visibly shaken now. For a moment she didn't have a response, but before the show could cut to break, a young studio tech, maybe 24, wearing a headset and clipboard, stepped toward the floor manager. "Can I just thank him?" she asked. The manager hesitated, then nodded. She walked onto the edge of the set, whispered something to Kash, and stepped back with tears in her eyes. Marissa looked over. "What did she say?" Kash answered calmly. "She said her brother served, and that this is the first time she's ever seen someone speak like he used to talk, when no one else was listening." The control room? Silent. Twitter? Exploding. "He speaks for us, Kash unfiltered, not out of touch." Marissa Kane sat unusually still in her chair. The moment had changed. What was supposed to be a sharp, media-savvy sparring session had become something much heavier and far more real. Kash Patel had not only pushed back, he had shifted the entire weight of the conversation onto her lap. She took a breath, glanced off camera, then tried to regain control. "Kash, I'm not here to silence you. I just think we need to find middle ground." He didn't flinch. Middle ground between truth and convenience is still a lie. There it was again, the sentence that didn't just push back. It rewrote the script. Marissa paused. "I'm just trying to be fair," she said, finally. "Fair?" Kash echoed, then leaned in. "Fair would have been asking these questions 3 years ago, when people were being deplatformed for saying things that turned out to be true. Fair would have been journalists challenging power, not echoing it. That one hit. Hard. Even the studio crew felt it. The boom mic tech muttered under his breath, "Damn." Marissa tried again. "Okay, but how can people trust you, Kash? You've been called extreme, divisive, even dangerous." He tilted his head. "By who?" "The people whose power depends on silence." Then came the question, the one that cracked the room. "Marissa, are you really listening, or just waiting to speak?" You could feel it, even through the screen. A shift, a pulse, a wave of people watching, nodding, repeating the question aloud. "Are you listening or just waiting to speak?" It exploded across social media. Even rival networks couldn't ignore it. Clips of that moment aired on 5 major channels within an hour. Marissa Kane looked down at her notes, then closed them. She exhaled slowly, and for the first time that morning, she said something off script. "You're right." The air in the studio was unlike anything Marissa Kane had experienced in her years as a host. The hum of monitors, the buzz of earpieces, the nervous silence of a control room that usually thrived on control. And now? All eyes were on her. She looked at Kash Patel and said clearly, You're right." The words hung in the air, not because of what they meant, but because of what they cost. "You weren't out of touch," she continued. "I was out of practice. Out of practice listening." Kash didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded with quiet respect. Marissa turned slightly in her seat and did something no one expected. "Before this segment aired," she said to the camera, "our prep team gave me talking points, questions to challenge Mr. Patel, topics to push, but there's something they didn't prepare me for." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "A year ago my cousin returned from his third tour, Iraq. He wouldn't talk about it. I didn't ask." Her voice broke just slightly. 3 months later he took his own life." The studio was silent. Not just quiet, silent. And maybe part of me knew what I didn't want to admit, that there were stories I wasn't ready to hear because they would have challenged everything I thought I understood. She turned back to Kash. "So, thank you for speaking, even when I wasn't ready to listen." The chat feed on the network's live stream exploded. That just shook me. Give her credit. She owned it. Kash just made TV history. This is what grown-up dialogue looks like. Even anchors from rival stations shared the clip. One wrote, "That's how you apologize. That's how you evolve." Kash nodded again. "Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do in a debate is not to win, but to wake up." The cameras went dark. The red light above the lens clicked off with a soft buzz. The segment, intended to be 7 minutes, had run nearly 28. No commercials, no cues, no filter. Marissa Kane pulled off her earpiece. Kash Patel set down the folder he hadn't even finished opening. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Marissa looked over and said softly, "That was supposed to be a takedown." Kash smiled barely. "Turns out the only thing that went down today was the wall between two people having an honest conversation." The control room door opened. A producer stepped in, holding a phone. "It's corporate," he said. "They want to speak to both of you." Marissa raised a brow. "Both?" The producer nodded. "President of the network." She took the call, put it on speaker. A calm but firm voice came through. "That was the most powerful interview we've aired in 5 years." Silence. "Then we're rebroadcasting it tonight, prime time. Full hour. No edits, no spin. And Marissa, whatever comes next from the press, you have our support." Marissa glanced at Kash. "What about him?" "Book him again. This isn't over. America's awake." When the call ended, Kash stood to leave, but before he walked away, Marissa extended her hand. "Off the record," she said, her voice low but steady. "I didn't expect to be moved. I thought I had you figured out." Kash shook her hand. "You didn't figure me out. You just finally saw past the script." In the hallway, a young staffer ran up, holding a folded printout. "Mr. Patel, look." It was a still image from the broadcast. The moment he asked, "Are you listening or just waiting to speak?" Underneath, quote of the day, already framed in the lobby. By noon the next day, Kash Patel's face was on every major news outlet, but not as a villain, as a voice. A clip of his line, "You're more worried about the distrust than the reason it exists," was played on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives during a debate on government transparency. C-SPAN aired it in full. One congressman stood and said, "When a media segment says what half this chamber won't, it's time we ask who's really out of touch." On college campuses, students shared the quote alongside their own stories of censorship, silence, and being told what questions not to ask. Even commentators who normally clashed with Patel said the same thing. He didn't go in swinging, he went in explaining, and somehow that hit harder. But not everyone was thrilled. By the end of the day, Kash received an official letter from a federal agency, vague, cautionary, bureaucratic. "We urge restraint in future media commentary pertaining to ongoing national investigations." It wasn't subtle. It was a warning. Kash read the letter, folded it, and tucked it away. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Patel, this is Annika Rhodes, producer of 60 Minutes. I watched your segment yesterday, and America's watching now." A pause. "We'd like to do a full feature, not a hit piece, a conversation." Kash didn't hesitate. "Only if it's unedited." Annika smiled on the other end. "After what you pulled off yesterday, we wouldn't dare." That night, the network re-aired the full interview. Over 8 million watched. By morning, the hashtag #NotOutOfTouch had reached over 100 million impressions across social media. But for Kash, the most powerful moment came in an email. Just one sentence. I never listened to people like you until you spoke like that. My father would have called you dangerous. Today, he quoted you at the dinner table. The backlash came fast. After his segment re-aired in prime time, Patel's inbox filled with support, but also with warnings. One government watchdog group filed a formal ethics complaint. A popular pundit on a rival network called him reckless, radical, and dangerous to democracy. But the invitation still stood. Kash Patel was scheduled for a live panel discussion on the Round Table, a show known for pitting heavy hitters against one another. 5 guests. One theme, truth versus trust. Who gets to control the narrative? The moderator opened the floor with a dig. Mr. Patel, given your recent viral fame, some critics say you've leveraged emotion to bypass fact. How do you respond to that? Kash didn't blink. If emotion's the only thing getting through, maybe it's because fact got buried under bureaucracy. One panelist, a former intelligence official, chimed in smugly, "You're endangering institutions built to protect national stability." Kash turned to him calmly. The most dangerous threat to stability is when the people stop believing the institutions even belong to them. The audience clapped. The moderator pushed harder. But isn't that cynicism corrosive? Cynicism is what you get when transparency dies, Kash replied. This isn't new. It's just finally being recorded in real time. Then came the moment. A fellow guest rolled her eyes and said, "Honestly, Kash, your whole persona just feels out of step. Out of touch with where this country's headed." A hush, a flashback to the words that started it all. Kash looked at her and said slowly, "When truth gets you called out of touch, you're probably touching the nerve they wanted left alone." Boom. Applause erupted in the studio. The moderator tried to move on, but the panel was visibly shaken. One even muttered, "He just ended the conversation." By that evening, his quote had overtaken every trending list. Truth doesn't get applause, it gets resistance. And I've never trusted applause anyway. Kash Patel. 1 week after the segment that shocked the media world, Kash Patel stood backstage at a veterans' town hall in Pennsylvania. He hadn't come to speak. He came to listen. But as the panelists rapped and applause died down, the event organizer took the stage and motioned toward him. "There's someone here tonight who didn't ask to be honored, but reminded us what honor sounds like." He stepped into the light. The crowd, a mix of veterans, students, families, and press, rose to their feet. Not for fame, not for politics, for truth, the kind that made people uncomfortable enough to think. A teenager stepped forward with a phone in his hand, shaking. "Mr. Patel, I'm sorry. I wrote this down the night you spoke with Marissa. My dad's a Marine. He never says much. But when you said middle ground between truth and convenience is still a lie," he nodded and said, "That man gets it." Kash put a hand on the kid's shoulder. "Your dad's nod means more to me than 1,000,000 retweets." Later, as he exited the stage, a woman in a simple navy blazer caught his eye. It was Marissa Kane. She'd flown in unannounced. No cameras, no handlers. She walked over and handed him a small box. Inside, a silver tie clip engraved with his most quoted line, "You're more worried about the distrust than the reason it exists." She looked at him and smiled. "You changed the interview. But more than that, you reminded people how to speak without permission." The next morning, a photo from the event went viral again. Kash standing at the edge of the crowd, a folded paper in his breast pocket, and behind him, dozens of American flags fluttering in the fall wind. No mic, no spotlight, just presence. And in the caption, "Turns out he wasn't out of touch. We were out of practice."